Good day and welcome to today's webinar. Almac Group leverages scriptless testing automation to improve application quality and delivery. This webinar is brought to you by Turnkey Solutions Corporation. And I'm your host today. My name is Becky Karch. I'm the Vice President of Customer Success at Turnkey. And a little bit about myself. I've got over 30 years in the quality assurance and test business, working on a variety of different products and platforms. I've held director level roles at McKesson, ProStore Systems. I've been QA manager at companies including SpectrumLink and Storage Tech. And I've worked with some other startup organizations, but my entire 30-year career has been in QA. And I've had firsthand experience of what it takes to develop a test automation team and develop that strategy. And I often speak and share some of the pitfalls and successes of my journey. Today our presenters are Shauna Quinn. She's the top software test manager at Almac, who's going to be sharing her own journey. Shauna is a test manager for Almac's Oracle EBS system and oversees the testing for this highly customized business environment, including large implementations and enhancements across key business functions. She's worked at Almac for 8.5 years and oversees a team of testing experts covering 3 work streams, including support, products, and automation. Her focus is on bringing business and technology together to effectively validate the entire business process and workflows. And I've already given you a little bit of information about myself. So a little bit of the housekeeping here. Today's live session is intended for all Vivit members. The recording is posted in the webinar section of the Vivit website. It's visible for all members. Additionally, today's slide deck and webinar recording will be made available to you, and we'll send you the link via email once they're posted to the Vivit website. We've also got a case study that Almac has done for Turnkey, and that is also available through the handouts. And we can also post that through the handouts section, and it'll also be mailed to you along with the link once this slide deck is posted to the Vivit website. If you have any questions as we go along, please type them into the questions pane, and Shauna and I will make sure that we answer them. I think that's, oh, here's a picture of the, here's a picture of the webinar control panel so that you can see the questions pane, and make sure that you expand the questions pane to type your question into the box. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we're going to go through the key learning points and the takeaways that we want you to have from this presentation. We want to show you how to build a better alternative to manual testing methods, how to streamline your operations and shrink testing cycles from weeks down to days, and how to quickly and easily validate core business systems with a comprehensive regression suite, and show you some best practices in developing a solid testing strategy moving forward. So I want to give you a little bit of background about Turnkey Solutions. We were founded in 1989. We were an HP Mercury technology partner, and we currently still are. And we're an OEM partner since 2012. Privately held, located in Denver, Colorado, and we have offshore operations in India. We've got a global presence. We're growing customer presence across all continents. Our scriptless automation testing solutions are built exclusively on the HP ALM technology stack. We work very closely, our technology works very closely with UFT and BPT, and we provide a scriptless automation testing platform that works with a number of application types using a common set of tools. We also have a professional services team, which I manage, that also works with our customers to get them up and running and be successful with our technology. A little bit about Almac. They are an award-winning global contract development manufacturing organization in the pharmaceutical and biotech industries. Craigavon, Northern Ireland, I'm sure I butchered that, sorry Shauna, with operations across the UK and across the US as well. They've got 3,900 highly skilled personnel employed at Almac, and they've got several different business services operations that you can see here. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Shauna. And Shauna's going to go through her journey, her team's journey on the road to developing test automation, starting with their need for automation. So go ahead, Shauna.
Hello, everyone. I'm hoping you can see my screen. Becky, can you see the screen okay? Yeah?
I sure can. Thank you.
That's great, thanks. So I'm just going to talk briefly through sort of where we came from and sort of our journey through automation. So in October 2012, our ERP system went live. As a test team ourselves, we had no functional knowledge of the system or the end-to-end business processes. We mainly dealt with the data migration into that system and the integrations into that system. So we were heavily reliant on the business to carry out tests and to provide support. And doing that, it removed them from their day-to-day business. The testing was all manual as well. None of our testing was automated. So for a large ERP system, that was a very large overhead. By the start of 2014, the functional end-to-end testing, we had a grip on it. We knew as a test team how the business worked. We had that end-to-end business knowledge. We had testers that were specialized in each specific area with a broad general knowledge of the system. The testing was determined by the tester and discussed and agreed with our business analyst or our business representatives, but it was still all manual. Then in March 2014, we had to make a decision to upgrade our ERP system. We were running out of support and we had to undertake the large project to look at this and to identify the tests that we need to run. It was a 9-month project and it took 7 manual test cycles, which incorporated about nearly 4,700 odd manual tests were executed. And although the knowledge and skills were in the test team, we were again heavily reliant on the business to provide the resources that we needed. And a team of 20 business users and BAs were used to supplement the test team to allow this to happen. The UAT cycle on its own, to give you an idea of the immensity of this, was 12 weeks long. It involved the 20 business users and BAs, and it involved the entire test team. It was 12 weeks where we were heavily manually testing, and we were removing those business users from their day-to-day activity and from their day-to-day roles, and it was no longer acceptable to the business or to ourselves that we couldn't support the testing that was required within our system. So our conclusion at that point was that automation was required. It was a necessity for us as a business and as a team. We did go through a software evaluation. We carried out a lot of research and we carried out a POC on 3 automation solutions. The POC process, we did have key criteria, which was, did it work with Oracle eBusiness Suite? Did it integrate with Quality Center, which we currently use? For the test creation, was there separation of data from the test? How easy was it to use? How easy was it to reuse components within that? How easy was it to build end-to-end data flows? And what sort of out-of-the-box content could we use and utilize? We decided, based on that full evaluation, that Turnkey and C-Factory was the way that we had to go. The component reusability, the ease of use, the ease of maintainability, it ticked all the boxes for us, and so C-Factory was the decision that we made to go forward with. The approach and the team, it was a joint effort between ourselves and Turnkey. So there was myself as the test manager. There was also a project manager who was a Oracle SME that was provided by Turnkey to provide guidance and support to ourselves. There were two senior testers, test leads that I had identified from within my team to lead this and to drive this. And there was a test automation engineer provided to provide support and guidance to my two testers. And then there was the business analyst that we had to leverage from within our own business. I say a core automation team of two Almac testers was created. They were completely ring-fenced. With discussions with Turnkey and with Becky, it was very clear that we needed to have a team that was 100% dedicated to the implementation, and removing those two testers was a big hit for the manual testing and for the testing that we were carrying out on a day-to-day basis, but it was a necessity. We had to take those testers out of the main sort of stream of testing and dedicate them to this implementation, or it wouldn't have worked. During the implementation stage, the team worked very, very closely with the customer success team personnel and the automation engineer provided by Turnkey. The training was conducted for the entire team. That happened towards the end of February this year. And the product was deployed and the implementation team began working through tests around about mid-March. So the test creation began. So they created new components. They had amended existing components that were part of the Oracle Accelerator Pack, and they also mentored us through any issues that arose. Sorry, Becky, do you want to take over?
Yeah, so when Turnkey got involved, part of that training and mentorship was to help them assess what tests they wanted to automate. And, clearly you can't automate everything. So there's a set of questions that we go through that gives our customers a good indication of where they should really focus their time and energy. Taking a look at the tests that they've got right now, and in Almac's case, Shauna's team had, a good number of manual tests. And they had already, taken a look at the test tools, the automated test tool, which was C-Factory, which they had chosen. They had already done some necessary staffing that Shauna just talked about, and kind of looking at roles and responsibilities. They've already had established a good way to interact with their business teams, with their business analysts. And taking a look at what kind of enhancements were coming in, what kind of changes were coming into the products, and things that that where they were looking at potential holes or high risks in their system, and from that they were able to build some very high quality end-to-end business tests. And so Shauna can tell you more about that, that process.
Okay, thanks, Becky. So the approach that we took was to take that UAT 12-week cycle and to take the two end-to-end business scenarios that were tested during that 12-week cycle as a starting point for this work stream. So the full data, that is, each one of those business processes for Almac is a full data flow through the system. So it's everything from creating your customer, creating your project, your protocol, your quote, all the way through manufacturing, distribution, and bringing it right through to finance and invoicing. So it is our entire, a thin slice through our entire business. We had target completion for both of the end-to-end for December 2015. And the manual tests that fulfilled that in those scenarios were identified and planned in conjunction with the Turnkey customer success team. So the manual tests that made up those two end-to-end business process, there were hundreds of them. So we sat with the team and basically sliced up the work. Who was going to work on what area, what bits needed to link into what other bits. So we did have to create a large number of components, and we had to change components, but that was easily done with the tool. We were able to link the newly created components with ease together with the pre-built components to create test scripts. The test scripts were then linked together to create test sets for the end-to-end flow, and a data sheet was created and populated. So as I say, the components, by putting together existing maintained and newly created components, we created those tests and then linked those tests together to create our end-to-end business process. The first business scenario consisted of 273 test scripts linked end-to-end. So the data sheet is linked to those 273 tests. Each one of those test scripts, to give you an idea, is made up of about 20 to 30 components that have been linked together to allow us to navigate as per user through the system. And there's one master data sheet to allow the data to be created and consumed within the flow. And that was the main point for us, that we didn't want that if we were running automation through our environment, that it was consuming any other data for any of the manual testing that we were performing. So our flow does create and then consume its own data, so it doesn't have any other impact within the system. The reusability of the components for future scenarios was a big thing for us. We had to make sure that we could do that, and by using the business process flow, we're able to reuse chunks of that. We're able to take full sections of the components that are standard for each business process and reuse those again and again, and only where our business process flow differs, create or maintain a new script. So how it works, this is one of our screens within our ERP system. This is what it looks like. It's made up of a lot of different sections, a lot of different buttons, a lot of different commands that you've to select or press or scroll up and down. So C-Factory has all those components that allow you to do that. So they're built in to the test script. C-Factory then it analyzes that screen and creates a test component. So it has analyzed that screen and created a component for the header part of that screen. And then the component itself, is put into a test script with the navigation parts, with the data load parts, with the selecting the buttons. And you probably can't see very clearly there, but it shows you how many iterations you're going to run. It shows you how many inputs and outputs from your data sheet that you're going to have. The fact that it creates it and then puts it into Quality Center, it allows us as well to store that alongside our manual tests, that we're able to see and include them as part of our testing. The test script is then added into the test lab, and a data sheet can be created for that individual test if required. But in our case, we link those together. We link the 273 test scripts, so we have one massive test lab with a large data sheet that allows the data to flow through the entire ERP system. Say the master data sheet looks like this, and each tab is a different test script, and you input your data into that. But with with our data, because we are flowing it through the system, what we do is capture. So if we create a project, we capture that project number and then use it further down. So we use that value that we've captured then within the data sheet. So we're not having to continually create data, we're reusing the data. The first scenario was completed, our first end-to-end scenario was completed approximately September time this year, and our second scenario is on track to finish in early December. The current uses of our first scenario is in 3 optimization projects that we're running. All 3 of them are agile projects, which is the first again for Almac. We're just starting to look at sort of the agile methodology. But on the first project, it's been repeatedly executed on one environment to identify issues with patches and with code fixes. So the patches themselves, there's 416 new patches for Oracle E-Business Suite that have been loaded into this one environment, plus we also have optimization code going on in there. So we're executing that to make sure that the code or the patches behind haven't actually caused any issues within the environment. For the second project, we're executing at the same time in a separate environment, the full end-to-end as part of the formal ST. The second project impacted into 3 main parts of our e-business suite. It impacted into our customer creation, it also impacted into our quoting area, and it impacted into our finance. So it made sense for us to run the end-to-end the full way through because it impacted the start, the middle and the end. So it was run as part of our formal ST for that once we've got out of the dev test. For project 3, we're using a subset of the test scripts to create the to allow the data to be created overnight, and then for the tester to use that data that's been created the next day to manipulate that data. So we're using that more for creating data, manipulating data, but we are also running a regression against that as well. So the current results, the end-to-end testing took initially 12 weeks to complete. Now we have that down to about 3 to 4 days with very minimal input. That's allowing the guys to kick off a set of tests overnight, come in the next day, check those, kick off the next set, come in the next day, check those again. We do have 2 manual breakpoints, but that's because of our business process. It's not because of the actual product. The one is for print and labels, which is carried out in a completely different system, and the other one we're working with our development team for refreshing of the materialized views to allow data to be pulled into reports. So those 2, as I say, they're nothing to do with the tool themselves, they're to do with our business process. So it's a significant saving. It's reduced the number of people that was required to carry out that end-to-end process, which took 20 people initially, and it's been reduced to minimal effort by the business and by the person checking. My tester only has to go and talk to the business if we find an issue or an error when they're carrying out the manual steps. All the input they have is checking it, kicking off the tests and carrying out those manual steps. So going from that, from the 20 people for 12 weeks down to 3 or 4 days for one person, and we're able to run that in multiple environments at the same time. So we've also, with those 3 projects, we have found issues that were missed in manual testing. We found in the first project we have found, and we've raised SRs with Oracle because some of the patches have actually broken some of our custom code in and around our Oracle mobile app. We have also found issues where the configuration wasn't set up correctly in and around our customer creation screen in our second project. And in our third project, we found issues with the code itself. Whenever we were running the setup, it wasn't supposed to have impacted into the created items. It was only supposed to have been a change to the change item, but it had actually impacted into the create item as well, which was something that wasn't in scope for testing. So our next steps from an Almac perspective is that where we're going to use it next. because it's obviously adding benefit to our testing. We have a monthly support release, and this will be from January. The 2 end-to-end scenarios will be run each month at the end of the testing prior to it leaving us and going into the live environment, just to provide an extra layer of comfort for the end-to-end, because our support releases touch every part of the environment every single month. For an example, this month we have 8 releases, and they're spread across finance, quoting, distribution, 2 of our integrations. So running that end-to-end process for the 2 different scenarios will give us an extra level of confidence in the manual testing that's been performed in isolation. For the project work, we're going to continue, as they're agile projects, so they're currently, one's about to start release 2 and the other 2 projects are in release 1. So we're going to continue to test that patch impact. Obviously, if we're finding issues now, we're going to continue testing that to make sure that there's no issues in the future releases before we allow 416 patches to go into live. We're also using it to reduce the regression timelines in formal ST. So by running that end-to-end, we're touching the parts of the business that we wouldn't normally touch. We're checking that the data flows throughout the system are working correctly. We're also going to continue to use it to create test data for some of the projects. We can run it up to a certain point and then run multiple iterations to create data then. So we don't have to run the full end-to-end, maybe just run it up until, say, protocol creation, and then create multiple protocols. The second scenario, as said, is in progress and it's complete early in December. When we were creating that, the difference in the timelines between creating the first one and creating the second one, we were able to reuse approximately 50% of the components from scenario 1. We already had those components and test scripts sitting there, and we were able to reuse those. And from that perspective, it reduced the timelines for creating that scenario, and it will continue to reduce with scenario 2 if we branch out more into the next, more scenarios within the business. We'll be able to reuse more and more because we have a better coverage throughout the system. And once we have that complete in early December, we will have fully automated the UAT test cycle, and we'll be able to run those 2 in parallel in 3 to 4 days with 1 person, as opposed to 12 weeks with 20 people. Our next steps as well are to start looking at smaller regression packs or extensions with high volume of change. We have a lot of custom extensions within Almac, so some of them in and around projects areas or in around distribution. There's a lot of change, and as the business changes, we're forced to change the extensions to cope with the new sort of needs of the business. So by creating those smaller regression packs, again, we're going to save time in the regression of those extensions. It'll allow the manual testers to focus in on the functional requirements that have changed or the functional requirements that are impacted, but allow the regression itself to run at the same time. That can be used in either projects that I've discussed previously or in our monthly support releases. We will also be looking at automation to create data within the system, so we've less reliance on data that's been cloned down from production. As I say, if we can get our automation to create all the data that we require, it means that we remove our reliance completely on production data. And then there's keeping things that we want to do ourselves, which is automate and open our finance periods or our inventory periods within our dev and test environments. It sounds silly, but it's a day to 2 days, given the amount of environments that we have, for a tester or a developer to go in and open them. So anywhere where we can save time and utilize the automation is great. To continue supporting the automation, the business analysts will continue to support the automation adoption, but it'll be minimal. We know the business ourselves. It's only where we've hit an issue or we're not sure of a data link within the system for a scenario that's not commonly used, that we'll need to lean on them again. The automation team will continue to consist of the 2 testers, but those 2 testers are starting to get more involved now in the Agile projects. They're going to be involved the dedicated manual tester, to allow the manual tester to spend more time on exploratory testing, to start converting those sort of acceptance tests to accept the user story, converting those into automated tests that they can then use in their formal FT, and allow the automation team as well to see where the screens are changing, to identify the maintenance that's required to the components or to the test scripts early, so that it doesn't impact, and that we have that sitting ready for when the project goes live. I'd say there was a few lessons learned, or things that we've done well, or things that I would advise people that are going down this route to consider. The preparation is key. You need to know what you want to automate and why you want to automate it. For us, it was to allow us to remove that reliance on the business. It was also to provide us with full end-to-end regression. Given the nature of our product, given the fact that it is an ERP system, the data has to flow, and it has to flow correctly. If something gets stuck somewhere, your whole business stops. Have the manual steps and flows documented prior to commencing any automation. We knew the manual tests that we had to convert into automated tests, but they were very, very high level because they were UAT tests. So we had to drill down and identify those manual steps, and again identify where the business would have assumed to go on to the next step. They maybe didn't document it. So documenting your business flow is very important. Design the test flow to create and consume its own data. It means that you're not consuming data that the rest of your test team is maybe reliant on. If we had the data sheets set up in such a way that we were consuming the data all the time, we'd very, very quickly run out of data within our test environment. So by doing it as a flow instead of in isolation in chunks, then you're allowing the regression run to work in isolation, and it allowed people to test in the same environment. So what was key as well for us was getting the right people involved. Dedicating 2 of my key testers to this implementation was a big commitment, and ring fencing them was even harder to do. And from a testing perspective, that it's nearly impossible taking those 2 key people. One was my key finance tester, and the other one was my key projects tester. What I had to do was make sure that their knowledge was transferred within the rest of the team, and that to allow them to get along with what they needed to do, to allow them to be completely dedicated on this project. They were also very, very keen to learn and very, very enthusiastic to learn. So I think that's key as well, that the guys involved wanted to learn, they wanted to be part of the automation team. But another key thing is that neither of them had any UFT experience. They didn't have any automation experience. They were 2 manual testers that just had experience with the system. Another important thing is to track the progress. Get your initial scope nailed down. Make sure that you have targets and you track against those targets, and you identify key milestones. For us, it was getting the tests created, then linking the tests, then getting the data sheet created, and then moving through that data sheet, making sure that the data was flowing, any issues were identified through that. That's all I have. Is there any questions?
Yeah, there are actually a ton of questions.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, no, well, I can help you with those, Shauna. A lot of the questions have to do with how C-Factory works. So I wonder if you could scroll back up to those slides that, kind of start with, how the solution works. Yeah, right, go to the next one. Yep, perfect. Yep. Okay, yeah, perfect. That's perfect. So your questions were around, how C Factory works. Is it data-driven or keyword-driven? How does it interoperate with UFT? Does it sit on top of UFT or does it work separately? So I'm going to try to answer all of those questions and give Shauna a little break here all at once. So C Factory does analyze a screen. Shauna showed you the screen previously, and we capture that screen in a lot of it's kind of a similar way to UFT. We do have in the operations area, you'll see these are all keywords. So it's a keyword-driven technology. The items are the things on the screen themselves. The operation, as I said, are keywords. The value is what that parameter would look like within the data sheet. And we also have documentation within C Factory that shows you what we're going to do, what that operation will do on that particular item within that screen that you're capturing. So we then take that component and we store that directly into ALM. And then when it comes time to execute that test case, C Factory has a data driver that actually, if you can scroll down to a picture of the data sheet, we actually use the data in the data sheet, load the components that are associated. You can see those components kind of across the top in that gray bar. Load those components and then enter the data according to what's in the data sheet. And it is UFT running kind of underneath what we're doing here, but it is keyword driven and it is data driven all at the same time. So I hope that answers all of those questions there. So I also then have some questions for you, Shauna. Let me scroll up. We've got so many questions in. I just want to make sure that I find the right ones. So your team was doing UAT testing, and that's what you decided to automate. Do you have any test steps prior to UAT that you also run and that you've done some automation for?
Yes, when I say that we decided to run the UAT, our testing as a test team is normally functional. So when we were doing the upgrade, our upgrade was there were specific fixes into the extensions. So as a test team, through the system test cycles, we would have tested those in isolation, the extensions in isolation, to ensure that the fix going into those were working. The reason that we decided to automate the UAT cycle was to take away that reliance on the business, to allow us that if we had had that regression pack, end-to-end regression pack, we would have found issues so much. We would find issues with the data flowing from the system that the upgrade had caused. We would have found issues where forms just didn't work. It allowed us, by focusing in on this, it allows us to increase our test coverage. It still allows us to manually focus on the functional requirements that have changed, but it allows us from a regression perspective to identify areas and to have a greater coverage throughout the system that we never as a test team had before. I don't know if that answers the question fully.
Yeah, I think that does a really good job. Another thing, when you're talking about your next steps, Shauna, and those slides there, at what point in the development process could you actually start to create those automated tests? I think that's a really good question.
Yeah, I'd say the guys in the next steps, currently we have our first Agile project has just finished formal ST. We didn't get the automated tester involved until it was in sprint 3. So we're following the normal sort of Agile methodology, 3 sprints, 4 weeks each. And then because we're pharmaceutical, we have to then run formal ST that are linked to our functional requirements then to prove that our requirements have been met. So he wasn't involved till Sprint 3, and there was a lot of screens that had changed. So lessons learned for us is to get them involved earlier. From their perspective, with the screens changing, he was able to maintain the screens very, very quickly, and he was able to kick off the automation and have that running in the background. He did hit issues and have to maintain more components and maintain more test scripts. But again, because he wasn't involved at the very beginning, lessons learned for us. So now they're going to be getting involved with the Agile team at sprint planning. So they're going to be there knowing what is in the backlog, knowing what items they're going to be tackling, and working alongside the manual tester. So as the manual tester has done its exploratory testing and then has written their sort of acceptance test to say, yes, I'm accepting that item on the backlog has been successfully met. At that stage, when it's starting to firm up, or the screen's firmed up, or they have no more changes in that area, that's when I want my automation testers involved then, making the changes then to automate that, which means even in the next sprint that can be run as an automated test as opposed to having been run as maybe a manual regression test.
Okay, good answer, thanks. Here's a couple more questions, I think, Shauna, that I can take. As per the webinar title, could you please explain what you mean by scriptless test automation? So what traditional automators might do using UFT is write test scenarios using VB-Script. Using cFactory, you have basically the ability to componentize, create a component for a particular screen. So think of a component as the encapsulation of a screen and all of the objects on a screen. And you can then start putting those objects together in your test scripts. And the value there is that you get to reuse, or you potentially can reuse those screens in your test flow, your end-to-end test flow, by entering different data in at different points during your test flow. So rather than in UFT scripting a scenario, an end-to-end scenario, you can assemble these test scripts so that you can effectively generate multiple scenarios from your set of components. As Shauna had shown you, here's a test script that is made up of a number of different components, and from your data sheet then, your data is laid out such that your scenarios are utilizing those components in multiple different ways. So the data sheet is actually driving the scenario as opposed to VB-Script doing one scenario at a time. Traditionally, VB-Scripters in UFT are scripting one scenario at a time. Here you've got in a data sheet the ability to drive multiple scenarios using those components in very different ways. There's also a question about are you able to validate output and validate output from previous tests and other components? Absolutely. Within the data sheet, the Turnkey data sheet, you can use regular expressions. You can put any kind of logic. It's an Excel spreadsheet. Any kind of logic that you can think of in Excel. We can put in tags to blank out data. You can actually control the flow through a particular component by adding multiple lines, or by blocking out particular components within an iteration of that, just that single component within your script. You can pass data from component to component and from test case to test case within the data sheet. So the data sheet is pretty powerful. So thanks for those questions. Shauna, one question to you. What was your strategy for writing the test scripts, the test steps before automating? It seems it would be difficult to write test cases for a system that a business hasn't used.
Well, with our system, we do have a lot of functional tests. So we did the tests that the business wrote to carry out the UAT were maybe 1 or 2 step tests that said create a project, save project number, use the next test. And that's sort of, very, very simple, very, very high level. We do have the equivalent of that in a functional test that will say log on as this user, navigate to this path, open this form, enter, select customer, click button, save, test. So they're the steps we needed to automate. Not all testers would know all those steps, so it was identifying from the UAT tests what functional tests were the equivalent that we already had created. Some of them we did have to maybe beef up the steps a wee bit. Maybe the UAT test had gaps in it that the business would automatically know to do that next. So we had to basically make the flow with our functional tests to allow us then to easily carry out the automation. When you think about it, I had a finance tester and a project tester. They don't know a lot about this, didn't know a lot about distribution, maybe didn't know a lot about manufacturing. So to have those functional steps was key to keep them going. So as a team, we worked on identifying those functional tests that had those steps in it. As a team, we supported them if they were unsure of a business area, but by having those steps, it gave them a really good starting point that they weren't then leaning back on the manual testers and going, I'm not sure about this area. But it did give them, because they were very specialised in their areas, and that's the way that we have to be, is that a certain tester tests a certain part of the system, but because they needed to know it all, it was the best way of getting them knowledge.
Yeah, and the business users became comfortable with this whole process, with the fact that their tests were automated, right?
Yes. I'll say the business users went back into the business. The business analysts did continue to support that in a minimal way. By us doing the upfront work and identifying what we wanted to automate, why we wanted to automate it, the business bought into that, that we wouldn't have to go and heavily, lean on the business again to carry out that testing, because we're going to continue to upgrade, we're going to continue to patch the system, we're going to continue to grow it. You're always going to have that need for regression within an ERP system. So by future-proofing that, by allowing the automation testers to create those flows, by building up on those flows, when I say they're a small slice through the system, you're maybe getting to a point where you hit iterations and then you're creating a lot of data. So this particular screen, it's showing you sales order header. We have multiple types of sales orders. We have maybe 6 or 7 different types. They're org specific as well. So for them to create that, they'll get to a point and then they'll create multiple iterations, multiple scenarios. So it allows them to take that thin slice but then build upon it, and allows us greater coverage within the system. And say, looking then after we have the full flow, looking at the smaller regression packs in and around, we might even be able to take chunks out of this and then just build on new scenarios. The bones behind everything that we're planning to do will be in these 2 regression flows. One is serialized, one's non-serialized, so it covers the 2 main parts of our sort of high-level business. It allows us to build upon them, build in the scenarios that we most frequently use, and increase the coverage within the system.
Right. So I think that reuse is kind of key to a few other questions that we've got. Why wouldn't you use a record and playback tool, or why wouldn't you use Sprinter? really the reuse of the components is kind of key and critical to that. When you're doing a recording of a scenario, that scenario really only has usefulness if those screens stay the same. I just want to make mention of the fact that the components are maintainable. cFactory has the ability to go, if a screen changes, has the ability to go relearn that screen, and then when you save it back to ALM, it will go and find every test case that component was used, every data sheet that has that component in it, and make those changes automatically. If you're doing a recording, kind of methodology, or you're even scripting, generally what you're doing is you're recreating that scenario as opposed to just updating that component and having that component, all of the updates kind of propagate throughout everywhere they're used, including the data sheet. So I think that's a main distinction of the cFactory technology. And Shauna has said that those components are also reusable. I talked about the reusability with different scenarios kind of going forward. So there is quite a difference between some of the different recorder type technologies that HP might have. Wow, we keep getting questions in here. I can't stay on top of them as fast. Let's see. How are values verified in downstream components? How are they passed from one component to the other? Are they passed upstream to downstream components by ALM as parameters? What if you have 20 parameters? Okay, so I think that we're kind of getting into more of the nitty-gritty. Really, a lot of the value passing is done right within the data sheet. We might, if you go to Turnkey's website, turnkeysolutions.com, we can certainly arrange a demo for you so that you can kind of see this more live in action. And I think that might get some of your lower level questions answered. So, Shauna, talk about the fact that this doesn't replace all of your manual testing, does it?
No, it doesn't replace our manual functional testing. You'll always have requirements that change. You'll always have requirements that you need to go in, and especially with us starting to adopt a more agile approach, you want to go in and you want to explore the changes that the developers made, maybe the new screen, be more fluid back and forth, with the developer. So you need to be there manually doing it and showing them where you find the issues. But where it does add value is in converting those. Once they carry out the exploratory tests, and they then convert them into acceptance tests, and then it's converting those into some form of an automated suite that they can then run as a regression to reduce the ST time. So the formal ST, normally for a release of 12 weeks, a development release of 12 weeks, you're probably looking at test effort of about 12 weeks for 2 developers, about 9 to 10 weeks for a tester, approximately, depending on how in depth the changes are. But we've reduced that down for the 3 projects that we're working on. We've reduced that down to 3 weeks because we're able to take the regression need, end-to-end regression need, and put that onto the automation team. And so the guys are just focusing on ensuring that our functional requirements that are linked to our formal ST tests have been met, which allows us to remain compliant and to show that our system is fit for purpose. As I say, because we're pharmaceutical, we do have a validation team, we do have a quality team. We have to ensure that that we follow our procedures, and our procedures are that we need to have formal ST against our functional requirements, that we need to have the validation team need to have the URS requirements, and they need to challenge them in their user acceptance testing. But say we're reducing our time, and we're putting releases into production faster, and maybe from my perspective, that with more quality, if we're finding issues, by running this as a regression that we wouldn't have found manually. To me, that's all added value. You know, to run this against the monthly release come January, we will be, you know, sort of testing, regression testing everything that we're putting into live prior to it going live, as opposed to maybe a mini regression, manual regression pack that we would have had for our support releases up until that point.
Right, right. I've had another question too about the types of applications that cFactory works with. In Almac's case, it was their Oracle ERP system, but it does work against other technologies as well. Turnkey has accelerators to get you started faster with Oracle, SAP, PeopleSoft, Salesforce.com. We're also developing additional accelerators. But really, any application that UFT works with, cFactory will work with again as well. So that's things like .NET and Java and other, you know, other technologies. We've worked with customers where UFT didn't support that technology, and we've developed extensibility. And when I say we, that's the customer success team that I run, has developed extensibility to allow cFactory to create components for that application. But generally, anything that UFT works with, cFactory will work with as well. So the questions have stopped coming in. Sean, I think this is a good time to kind of do the wrap-up. I will also write up answers to all of your questions, and those will be available at the end of the presentation as well. I think they'll go out with the email. So just to wrap up, wanted to let you know that both Turnkey and Almac and Vivid will be in London for HP Discover 2015. Turnkey has a booth there. Make sure that you stop by. It's booth 532. We're also going to be doing a roundtable, so you can meet Shauna in person. Shauna will be there with us, and she can answer more of your questions on their Almac Scriptless test automation journey on December 3rd at HP Discover. And Vivid will also, you know, have some promotions there and some booths. They're going to be in the transformation zone, and can also, you know, you can get discounts on some of the sessions, as well as register for some of the breakout sessions that Vivid is sponsoring as well, that you can see here. So I want to thank you for your time and ask that you all complete the short survey. And you can also certainly get more information from Turnkey at our website, turnkeysolutions.com. Also sign up for a demo there, and as well as download the case study that Almac has put together for us. So thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate all of the great questions, and hopefully you'll join us for future Vivid presentations.